What's up guys, in this Lightroom Classic tutorial I'm going to explain how the histogram works, which is located in the develop module. Before we get started, I want to show you an image to explain what is a histogram in photography, because the histogram is not exclusive to Lightroom. It's available in other photography software, including on your camera. So the histogram, it's a graphical representation of the exposure values of an image from 0, which is considered black, to 100, which is considered white, and the middle area, which is considered 50% black, 50% white, or neutral gray, is considered the midtones around here. So this image has an underexposed histogram, so meaning most of the photo is dark, which is pushed to the left, and this peak value means that there's a lot of pixels in this area that are dark or almost black. And here with this gap between the white point, or the last white point on this histogram, and this gap right here means that there's no pixels that are 100% white or near 100% white. It's about 5% short looking at this graph. And this is the opposite to histogram. This is an overexposed histogram, or an overexposed photo. So most of the pixels here are white or near white, and since this is a high peak right here of this bar or of this graph, means there's a lot of pixels that are near white. And this is the gap. This is the black point right here. This is the darkest part of the histogram or the image, so meaning there's no 100% black, or I should say 0. There's no black values here, no pixels that are black or near black. And now we go to this histogram here, which is considered normal exposure because the balance or the dynamic range of this image or this histogram, it's balanced out. You can see it's a little bit short of the 0 or 100% black here and the 100% white here. So what should a histogram look like? Well, there's no rule of what a histogram should look like, because sometimes an image could be underexposed or it could be overexposed depending on like the artistic touch you're going for. But if you want to have a balanced dynamic range and have the light properly balanced out, then you can have a histogram that looks somewhat like this, with the black point at 0 and the white point at 100. So now I'm going to explain how to use the Lightroom histogram. I'm just going to make this side or this panel bigger. And the Lightroom histogram, it has the main exposure values with this front area graph, which is a slightly tinted gray or almost white, and then it has the representation of the RGB values, red, green, and blue. So it could be a little bit confusing. So what I'm going to do is change the image to black and white to get rid of the saturation as well as the RGB histogram. Now the histogram, it also shows the meta values or the metadata of the camera, the ISO, the focal range, the aperture, as well as the shutter speed, which we don't need for this tutorial. Now this image, it has highlights or white here, and it has blacks or dark shadows here. So this image is mostly dark just because the clouds are also a little bit dark. Now if I want to move the histogram to the right, I can push it to the right using the exposure, or I can push it to the left and make it darker using the exposure. But usually the main tools that people use or photographers use to control the histogram is using the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So I can make it brighter or darker. I can make it brighter or darker. Now the highlights, shadows, and then the whites and blacks, they act differently with the histogram. So for example, the whites and blacks, it controls the whites or the white point and the black point. So the best way to show you an example of that is to go to this image right here. Here you can see there's a lot of gap here, or there's a big gap here, so there's no 100% white points on this image. So if I move the highlights to the right, see what happens. Like this peak value stays a little bit the same, but then it increases as I push it all the way to the right, but it doesn't get all the way to 100% white here. So the dynamic range isn't fully complete technically. So in order to do that, I would need to use the whites. So the whites is what controls this point here, the white point. So let me reset the highlights and let me push it to the right, the whites And now you can see it's getting closer to 100% white. So that's the difference between the highlights and the whites, as well as the shadows and blacks. The whites and blacks, they control the dynamic range more, or the black and white points. Another thing I can do is, instead of just sliding it to the right, I can shift double click on the whites and it'll automatically apply it, or at least attempt to correct the white point. See what happens when I double click on the blacks and see if it corrects the black point. It moved this a little bit area to the right. And now you can see, while I hovered over the histogram, you can see there's like a marking or there's like a title that says blacks, then shadows, exposure, highlights, and then whites. So for example, if I want to control the shadows, I can go to this area of the histogram, click on it and move it to the right or to the left. I'm just going to double click on this, reset this. I'm going to reset the whole image by pressing Control Shift R or Command Shift R. Now this middle area here, it says exposure, but just remember this middle area here around here, it's technically considered the midtones on the histogram. It's just that in Lightroom, by dragging the middle area of the histogram, it controls the exposure slider. Now I'm going to double click on this. Now going back to the other image that's black and white, another thing I can show you of an example of how the histogram works is by pressing R, which is the crop tool. Now I'm going to crop away all this highlighted area and watch what happens to the histogram. It's just pretty much black. I removed all the highlights and the whites, and there's like no midtones. Or there's a little bit of midtones here. This is technically considered a part of the midtones, but it's more on the dark side. Now, if I crop it and remove the dark areas, watch what happens to the histogram. So it's still dark here, but the blacks are gone and there's still no white. I can scroll down a little bit on this crop, get a little bit more white in here and get a little bit more black. I can also do this as well. If I want to get more white, I can crop it like this, and then I can move the exposure to the right. But the better way to actually do that is moving the highlights, the white points. So let me just reset this image, and that looks good. Let me get out of the crop tool. The Lightroom histogram also has another tool called the clipping indicators. You can turn on the shadow clipping by pressing on this up arrow sign on the left side, and the highlight clipping on the up arrow sign on the right side. Or you can press the keyboard shortcut J to toggle them off and on. Now, the blue area of the clipping indicators indicates shadow clipping, and the red area indicates highlight clipping. So clipping is just pretty much 100% black or 100% white, or areas of an image that is over or underexposed. And depending on the artistic touch you want, you may or may not want to correct the clipping. But if you do want to do it, usually use the highlight, shadows, whites, and black sliders. There are other tools to correct it, but these are the main ones. To correct the blacks, I can just move the black slider to the right. To correct the whites, I can move the white slider to the left. But as you can see, it doesn't fully work just because I believe there's not that many highlights in this image right here. So I'm just going to target the highlight directly and then move it to the left to remove the highlight clipping. While these tools in the histogram, the clipping indicators, represent highlight and shadow clipping, there is another tool that's usually used with the print module to set up a image to get printed correctly. So I'm going to show you an example of that by going to this virtual copy I have here. And instead of pressing J, I'm going to press S, which indicates or turns on the soft proofing to set this image up for printing. So this is the icon for the indicator, or to turn off or on the indicator for color clipping. This is the icon for the gamut when your monitor is not able to reproduce the correct colors on your screen, which we won't worry about. This color clipping indicator is more important. So I'm going to show you how it works. But before we do that, we got to take a look at this color profile. And the color profile is the profile that gets sent to the printer or to the printing company to determine what the color profile of the photo is. Sometimes a printer or a printing company will provide a different color profile that you can use, and you'll be able to import it by clicking on other. Anyways, usually the standard is sRGB. So we're going to stick with sRGB. and I'm going to show you how the color clipping works. So notice this image, there's no highlight clipping. And I'm going to increase the highlights and I'm going to increase the whites to see if I can blow it out. So now you can still see there's no color clipping here. If I press J, let me turn the soft proofing off and press J. Now the highlight clipping is turned on. I'll turn it off and then turn back on the color clipping. So anyways, I'll reset the highlights and I'll reset the whites. So color clipping will happen usually when you're saturating the colors. So I'm going to increase the vibrance and I'm going to increase the saturation. So you can see all this area of the lake as well as parts of the tree is clipped because the printer is going to have a hard time reproducing this color with its ink. I'm going to turn off the clipping indicator and you'll see this indigo color or turquoise color is really rich, looks really nice on a monitor, but a printer may have a hard time reproducing this color. It may choose the next closest shade to print this out. So that's why you got to be careful when you're printing out on a printer or with a printing company. The colors may not always come out as exactly as you want, especially depending on how your monitor is calibrated and what the brightness level is. So to correct the clipping on this, I'm just going to turn it back on. I have to reduce the vibrance and I have to reduce the saturation. So as you can see, like this color doesn't look as good. So in order to make sure you have a nicely saturated image as well as there's no color clipping, you need to play around with this a little bit. Sometimes a little bit of color clipping is fine, but you don't want to go overboard when your print comes out totally off from what it appeared on your monitor. As well as this is one of the reasons why a color profile is important, to make sure it fits the color profile of the printer and the ink that it's printing with. It also depends on the paper and everything like that. So hopefully you guys got a better understanding of how the soft proofing works. We'll cover it more in the print module. The next question is, why use the histogram? Most of the time, if I'm just posting photos online or on social media, I don't use the histogram too much because I can just eyeball the brightness values and what I want it to look like, and I don't really care about overexposure, underexposure. But when you are printing an image, the clipping indicators for the soft proofing tool is very important. So that's one time you definitely want to use it. Another time you want to use it is if you're in different light settings at your home and there's different ambient light shining on your screen or on your monitor, or your brightness levels of your monitor changes, especially if you have true tone or you let your computer adjust the brightness values, it may be a good idea to at least take a look at the histogram to see how bright or dark your image really is. Another time you may want to use the histogram is when you're shooting outside in bright light and you're looking at the LCD screen of your camera and trying to review the photo. You don't really know how dark or bright it is because there's like sunlight and reflection on the screen. At that time, a black and white histogram makes a lot of sense. And if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram. Live easy, sleep breezy, stay lovely. Have a good one, guys.